Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Nahmaduhu wa nusalli wa nusallimu ala rasulihil kareem, amma ba'd. Firstly, Jazakumullahu khairan wa ahsanal jazaa for joining this course. And I hope you do enjoy it, inshallah ta'ala. Let me know any feedback that you have. I would be happy to listen to your feedback, inshallah ta'ala. Anything you disagree with in this course as well, please do let me know. Privately would be better. And the Telegram course, Telegram group, ideally just leave that for not discussions, more just for announcements from myself. So from the Islamic Knowledge account, or myself, usually it will be. Sometimes for the sister side, it may be the family that does it. But that is essentially all my messages, that the family will just be essentially forwarding on to that group. So you can assume it's me writing. You can ask questions on both the brothers and the sisters. So the sisters can ask on the sisters group, the brothers can ask on the brothers group. I will, inshallah ta'ala, try my best to attend to both of them. And anything you disagree with, you are not forced to follow anything that I tell you in the course in that sense. But yeah, I would advise that you just, try to pay attention to it and give it some thought, inshallah ta'ala. As we know, looking at the lesson timetable as well, we have got a few lessons and there will be a slight pause in the middle. Obviously, if you're accessing the recordings after this whole course is done, for you, you will notice no change. But for those who are going to be, inshallah, attending the courses live, you might notice that from 10th June, because I'm actually traveling, inshallah, for Hajj, I won't be able to do lessons. I don't want to promise lessons from there and the internet's not too good and the timings are not suitable, etc. So I'd rather just keep the lessons off, and then we'll carry on when we come back, inshallah ta'ala. In terms of also the course content, so there will be certain things in this course which I would prefer it if you kept it to yourself, in the sense that it's not for everyone's ears. It's if you're on this course, you've probably learned a little bit of Arabic. You're probably in like the third year, fourth year, or perhaps you're beyond that. You might actually have finished the whole Alim course. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone who's joined the course, or many who will have joined this course, I won't say everyone, will be already a bit rusty when it comes to Usul al-Fiqh, or might be a complete beginner. And that's why this course, it's quite important to understand that it's an introduction. So I do hope no one's coming to this course thinking you're going to get a full-on detailed explanation, the full laydown. We're going to go into Ilmul Kalam, Ilmul Usul, and we're going to look at literally, we will to some degree go to some details on certain issues, but other issues we will keep it pretty basic, and it's just a build up to the next stage and the next book that we hope to cover. But inshallah, I'm quite hopeful, inshallah ta'ala, that the level that we'll go to will be sufficient for you to kind of develop yourself further in another course, or perhaps yourself as well if you need to. Inshallah ta'ala. So without wasting too much time, we'll get straight into it. So we're going to introduce first the mabadi of Hanafi Usul Fiqh. One more thing that I just want to mention is that I will be speaking really, really, really clearly on certain issues. So if you think you've not understood anything, for the beginner, if you've not understood anything, you need to put your hand up, or you need to let me know at the end of the lesson. Just jot it down if you can on a piece of paper, that I never understood what this meant. If you think it's too integral and it's super important that, the whole thing depends around me understanding this, then you can even kind of write in the chat, I don't understand what you just said there. It's okay if it's something minor. I'll probably just address it at the end so you can save it as a question. But if it's major, you need to tell me. For the super experts, I do ask for you to, just overlook the fact that I may explain some really basic stuff as well. So I may actually explain certain things which you'll think, this is so obvious, why is he going into this? Everyone's different. I have to pitch the course at like an introduction level, which is what the course is titled. An introduction to Hanafi Usul Fiqh. So it will be a bit basic on certain points, and certain points it may be a bit more challenging. Inshallah ta'ala, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for help, assistance, and for the ability to actually benefit from this course, myself included. So introduction to the mabadi of Hanafi Usul al-Fiqh. So this is what we're looking at today. Now, the first thing is, what is mabadi, right? Mabadi. Again, we're not talking about Mabadi ul-Usul here, which is the book that we're covering. I'm talking about Mabadi of a field of knowledge. What is the Mabadi of a field of knowledge? So before studying any field of knowledge, you need to know the key aspects of that field of knowledge. If I'm studying chemistry, I need to know what's the definition of the chemistry, like what's the definition of chemistry? What is the definition of the field of chemistry? What is the topic? What will I be studying? So we know chemistry is different from physics, but where do we draw the line? Where would you say, okay, now you've gone to a physics lesson? When would you say to a certain person that he's now started to discuss physics, this guy? And when would you say to a person, oh, you're discussing chemistry? Where would you draw the line? And we all kind of know this, but it's about defining it in a way in which we can apply it everywhere. So if I started talking about certain forces and Newton's law and something like that, you'd know straight away, okay, I think you're going down the physics line there a little bit. But if I started speaking about carbon dioxide, or I started speaking about H2O, then you'd know, okay, this is more like the chemistry. Or if I started speaking about the organs of the body, you'd say, no, this is biology. So kind of every field has its key aspects. So the key aspects of the field of knowledge give me a mental appreciation of what this field is and its boundaries. And I can't judge a field of knowledge without knowing its key aspects. I can't say chemistry is so rubbish. It doesn't actually even tell me how the sun orbits, how the earth orbits the sun, or it doesn't tell me anything about the galaxy. I think chemistry is such a ridiculous science. It doesn't even explain simple things about the solar system. Nothing. It doesn't tell me anything about that. What I've done there is I'm being unfair to chemistry, because really that's kind of the forte of physics. That's where you'd learn about physics, would be the place where you'd learn about orbit and the solar system. And chemistry is more limited to the idea of chemicals and dealing with things that are related to that chemical type of idea. Now again, I don't actually know the definition of each of these terms, as I'm not a scientist, but what I'm trying to say is that I can't judge my hand, for example, due to the fact that it can't look at things. Like my hand is such a weak body part because I can't see anyone with it. Well, you're being a bit unfair on your hand. That's not the purpose of your hand, and that's not what your hand has been made for. Your hand is pretty good if you use it where it needs to be used. So the key aspects are referred to as the mabadi of a field. They will essentially tell you what this field is all about. So this is quite important when we come to Uṣūl al-Fiqh, because we need to learn what is Uṣūl al-Fiqh and where do we apply it, and what's the role that Uṣūl al-Fiqh plays in Sharia, literally in ulum al-Sharia. And Dr. Hamza Bakr, subhanAllah, there's a scholar in Turkey. He's an academic, mashallah, and quite a traditional scholar, mashallah. I've had the good fortune of meeting him. I've not studied under him. I've just had a good conversation with him. He's written a book called Mahiyatu Ulum al-Hadith, which we will look at a little bit. So it's a book in Arabic. It's called Mahiyatu Ulum al-Hadith. In that book, he says, and he argues, that if you do not fully understand the boundaries of a field of knowledge, you will either think that that field of knowledge is the be-all and end-all to apply a certain act, or you will think that that knowledge is a complete waste of time. It's going to be one of the two. You won't have a balanced appreciation of that field of knowledge. You'll either think it's everything. This field of knowledge will solve all my problems. Or you'll be on the other side and you'll think this field of knowledge is absolutely rubbish. It never helped me solve this thing. Whereas if you truly appreciate what that field of knowledge is for, you will use it in its capacity and appreciate it for the fact that it's been used in the right place. So you will give everything its due right, if that makes sense. So the latter scholars, specifically from 850 Hijri to 900 Hijri, conclusively determined that the key aspects of a field of knowledge are 10. There are 10 key important aspects of a field of knowledge. So Ibn Zakri at-Tilmisani, who was a scholar of the past, again, I don't want to go too much into the biographies. You can think of them as being like scholars of ilmul mantiq mainly, writes in his poem, and ilmul mantiq, ilmul usul, and ilmul kalam, they kind of overlap, all of those three fields. They related to one another. Writes in his poem Muhassalul Aqaid. It's printed with a different name, but Sheikh Hamza Bakri, if I'm not mistaken, in the book says, in his book, he says that this is the manuscript that he found with the title. He says فَأَوَّلُ الْأَبْوَابِ فِي الْمَبَادِ وَتِلْكَ عَشَرَةٌ عَلَى الْمُرَادِ. And he then goes and he lists the 10 important aspects that you need to know of every field of knowledge. So the first one he says is the definition, al-mawdu, the topic, ثُمَّ الْوَاضِعُ, then the person who came up with it. So, and then he carries on. Again, some of these are not really that relevant, and I don't want to confuse you too much by mentioning all of what these come. استمداد حكم الشارع, تصور المسائل الفضيلة, ونسبة فائدة جليلة. So you take the field of physics. You might now want to think, okay, what's the definition? What do we study in physics? Then you will have the purpose of physics. What's the end goal in physics? Who is the founder? Who is in physics? You may have a number of founding fathers, you could say, in physics, right? Same thing will now apply for chemistry, for biology, for maths, every field of knowledge. Same thing will apply for the ilmul arud, or the poetry, you could say, or you could say ilmul balagha, eloquence of the Arabic language. That's a whole field within itself. Ulumul Quran, you'll have a whole field there. Ilmu usul al hadith, that's a whole different field. Fiqh, what's the definition of fiqh? What's the topic of fiqh? What's the purpose of fiqh? Who is the founder of fiqh, in the sense that obviously Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is the founder, but whom played a huge role? Who was a founding father of this field? So this was then followed by Sheikh Sa'id Qudurah, and he kind of wrote this in his book, until Muhammad ibn Ali as-Sabban. By the way, I am taking this from Sheikh Hamza Bakri's Mahiyat Ulum al-Hadith, when he discusses this idea of al-Mabadi'ul Ashara, the 10 preliminary points that you need to know about any field of knowledge. And he wrote his famous couplets, and he also said the same thing. Inna mabadi kulli fannin ashara, al-hadd wal-mawdu'u thumma thamara. And he carries on. But what I'm trying to say is, a number of people kept revisiting and re-mentioning, you could say, the idea of 10. It's 10 points. It's 10 things you need to know about every field of knowledge. But the reality is, the most important key aspects are 3. You just need to know 3 things about a field of knowledge. And a number of scholars have said this. Fakhruddin al-Razi, a lot of them, scholars of Ilm al-Mantiq, Fakhruddin al-Razi, again, the famous author of Tafsir al-Razi, the very famous book that you will see people saying is in Razi's Tafsir, right? So he was actually a really important scholar who wrote a number of books in Uṣūl, Mantiq, in Ilm al-Kalam. And we'll come to what these fields are a little bit later, and I'll give you a little bit of again, I don't want to go into these fields too much, because it's a minefield, literally. They're quite confusing, some of them. But he was like a polymath. He was a genius in a number of fields. So he also mentions this idea that you kind of only need to know 3 things about a field of knowledge to properly appreciate it. You need to know the definition of that field of knowledge. What's the definition of this field of knowledge? What does it do? In the sense that, how do I define mathematics? How do I define chemistry, right? So that's one thing about Uṣūl al-Fiqh that we're going to have to come to. What's the definition? What's the topic? What will we be discussing in Uṣūl al-Fiqh? What's going to be like, if I was performing Uṣūl al-Fiqh in a lab, what would be in front of me? What would I be experimenting with, right? What am I touching in my Uṣūl al-Fiqh discussions? So that's the topic. So in chemistry, you can definitely say your topic will be your essential your chemicals in your lab. That will be your topic to some degree. Then the purpose. What's the final goal in Uṣūl al-Fiqh? Why do we study it? What's the main purpose? So these are 3 things that every field of knowledge, if you can ask yourself these 3 questions, you will learn and appreciate what this field of knowledge is all about. So for Uṣūl al-Fiqh, one of the earliest to discuss the key aspects of Uṣūl al-Fiqh, so the Mabadi of Uṣūl al-Fiqh, was a scholar by the name of Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, who wrote a book called Al-Burhan. He was the teacher of Imam al-Ghazali, rahimahullah. He was a very prominent Shafi'i scholar, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, and he drew upon the ideas of another very famous scholar by the name of Abu Bakr al-Baqillani, was a very famous Maliki scholar. However, Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni drew from his ideas, and he wrote a book in Uṣūl al-Fiqh. In that book, in the introduction of the book, he mentioned some of the key aspects of Uṣūl al-Fiqh, right? And he was one of the first. I'm not sure if he was the first, but definitely right at the top of that list would be Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, and he played an important role in creating this idea that many of the Uṣūl al-Fiqh books will now have a muqaddimah, an introduction, wherein they will go into like a muqaddimah fi ilm al-mantiq. They'll go into logic. What's the logic behind this field? And they'll dive further that, how do we determine truth, and how do we determine what's definitive knowledge and what's speculative knowledge, and it'll be a bit connected to kalam there a little bit as well. So all of that will happen, and that's why probably one of the best muqaddimas in Uṣūl al-Fiqh was written by Imam al-Haramain al-Juwayni, but then even better than his was by his student Imam al-Ghazali in his book that he wrote in Uṣūl al-Fiqh titled Al-Mustasfa. So you will actually, if you actually go on YouTube or you go into certain madrasas, they actually teach you the muqaddimah of Al-Mustasfa of Imam Al-Ghazali, which is a book in Usul Fiqh, which kind of just helps you to understand how things work in the world a little bit, and how to argument, how to present an argument, how to defend an argument, how to how to determine right, how to determine wrong. When can you say you've completely broken an argument? When can you say no, you've not really truly understood this argument? Or you, so it teaches you ilmul jadal, it teaches you everything. This muqaddimah of ilmul mantiq, it teaches you how to think the al-fikr al-sahih and al-fikr al-fasid. It teaches you the correct way of thinking from and distinguishing it from the incorrect way of thinking, right? So what's the definition of usul al-fiqh? What is usul al-fiqh? So we're going to start off with reading this Arabic. So I'm going to read it a bit slow, or I'll try to explain it as I'm reading it. Again, I'm not trying to translate word for word, but this is a muqaddimah. So we are going through a book written by Mufti Saeed Palampuri called Mabadi'ul Usul, which is a book that he intended to be read, or he intended to be studied before you study something like Usul al-Shashi. It was actually intended to be studied before Usul al-Shashi. Right, but we'll come to Usul al-Shashi and all the history behind all the different books in the Hanafi madhab in Usul. But this book has now been printed, Mabadi'ul Usul, and it was actually in the front cover. You can see it there on the right, Mabadi'ul Usul. It's been printed by, obviously written by Sheikh Saeed Ahmed Palampuri, but printed by who? Printed by a very talented scholar called Abdul Majid, and his name is there actually, you can just see it in blurred writing, Abdul Majid at-Turkumani. And he, in the beginning of this book, he writes and he presents his own definition, topic, and purpose of Usul Fiqh, because Mufti Saeed doesn't actually do that. He does, but very briefly. So the author decided, the printer decided that I'm just going to do a bit of a deep dive into this. So he says, Ta'rifu Usul al-Fiqh idafatan wa alaman. So there's two ways of defining something. You can either look at literal definition, in the sense that if I say, for example, someone's raised their hand, does that mean that my voice is not coming out too clear? I do hope that if it's more of a question, then let's leave it to the end. But for if my voice is not coming out clear, you do need to let me know straight away, right? So if it's a voice issue, just write it in the chat straight away. If the voice is not coming out, I really hope that's not the case. Okay, voice is fine, alhamdulillah. But let's just leave the questions a little bit later, because otherwise we'll really struggle with the lesson. But I'll come back to there's someone who's raised their hand. I'll avoid also mentioning names, so I hope you don't get offended by that. So ta'rifu usul al-fiqh idafatan wa alaman. So there's two ways of defining something. First, you literally take it in terms of its idafa, in terms of its attribution. So usul al-fiqh, the foundations of fiqh. So I define foundations, usul, and I define fiqh. That's one way of defining usul al-fiqh. Another way is I define the whole idea of usul al-fiqh. What is usul al-fiqh altogether? So the first one is referred to as at-ta'rif al-idafi, wherein I look at the mudaf ilayh, and I go into each one separately. I look at the mudaf, and then I look at the mudaf ilayh. I define the mudaf, and then I define the mudaf ilayh. And that's it. I leave it at that. That's it. Khalas. I walk away. And the second way of defining is, I don't look at it as mudaf ilayh. I look at it as one term, one big term, and I define it as one big term. And really both definitions kind of draw from one another. So he says, amma at-ta'rif al-idafi, as for the definition in terms of mudaf ilayh. He says, how am I going to define it? So he says, fal mudaf, what's the mudaf? Huwa al-usul, it's usul. Jam'u al-asl, it is the plural of al-asl. Wa huwa fil lugha ma yubna alayhi ghayruh. Al-asl is principle. The plural of it is usul. What is usul? What is al-asl? What does it mean in Arabic? It means ma yubna alayhi ghayruh, that upon which something else is built. So it is literally a foundation upon which something else is placed, right? So your carpet is your asl for your feet. Your feet land and they are built, or you could say they are placed upon the carpet. وهو مطلق يشمل الابتناء الحسي كابتناء السقف على الجدار. So for example, he says this is general. So ما يبنى عليه, that upon which anything is built. That can be physical building. So for example, a ceiling is built upon the wall, i.e. it leans upon the wall. The wall holds up the ceiling. Or it can be al-ibtina al-ma'nawi. It can be metaphorical. It might not be something you can see physically in front of you, but it's something that's in your mind. For example, كَإِبْتِنَاءِ الْحُكْمِ عَلَى دَلِيلِ. For example, a ruling is based upon an evidence. So the evidence holds up the ruling, but you can't see it in front of you. It's not in front of your eyes. Whereas with the wall holding up the ceiling, you can see it in front of you. ثم نقل الأصل في الاصطلاح لمعنى. Then al-asl, that's the linguistic definition. In terms of how we now refer to it in our dialogue in the field of usul al-fiqh, you could say that it's used in the meaning of ad-dalil, evidence, or al-qa'ida kulliyah, or a general principle, or wal-rajih, or that which is preferred. So some scholars, he says, وَرَجَّحَ بَعْضُ الْمُحَقِّقِينَ الْمَعْنَى اللُّغَوِي. Some have said, no, just leave it the way it is, which is, leave it the linguistic definition, that upon which something else is built. لأنه لا يحتاج حينئذ إلى النقل من المعنى اللغوي إلى الاصطلاح, because then we can just stick to the linguistic definition. We don't need to go to the definition that we commonly use in usul al-fiqh. So therefore, for ma'na usul al-fiqh, therefore, if we're going to say usul means that upon which something else is built, that means usul al-fiqh is what? That upon which fiqh is built. And what is fiqh built upon? The dala'il. So therefore then, the usul al-fiqh is essentially just the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. And the Qiyas will come to that later on. So wal mudaf ilayhi wal fiqh. So mudaf ilayh is fiqh. So ma'na usul al-fiqh will be adillatul fiqh. And what are the adillatul fiqh? The adillatul fiqh, adilla is essentially that upon which fiqh is built, which is the dala'il, the evidences. And what is fiqh built upon? Evidences. What are the evidences that fiqh is built upon? The Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. So do you understand how this works? We've essentially now defined what is usul al-fiqh from the mudaf ilayh perspective, which is, it is that upon which fiqh is built. It is those evidences upon which fiqh is built, which is the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. But then we've got one problem. We've still not defined what fiqh is. So what's fiqh? Al-fiqh huwa fi al-lugha al-fahm. It is to understand something. قال الله تعالى قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. Oh Shu'aib, we don't have a good fiqh of that which you are saying. So what does fiqh mean? Understand something. أي لا نفهم كثيرا مما تقول. I.e. we don't understand a lot of what you're saying to us. Was it because he was talking Portuguese? Or Chinese, na'udhu billah? No. He was talking their language, but they could not understand the deeper meanings of what he was saying. They were being ignorant, you could say, on purpose. So they were not wanting to understand. In essence, fiqh is an understanding. So now we can look at it carefully and we can say, what is usul al-fiqh? We come back to our original mudaf ilayh. Usul, we said, is the evidences upon which the fiqh is built. Fiqh is the understanding. Okay, therefore now, usulul fiqh is the evidences upon which the understanding of Sharia is based upon. The evidences upon which the understanding of Sharia is based upon, which is the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. Okay, so that's the mudaf ilayh definition. Now let's look at the actual proper definition, i.e. the definition that you will see scholars using, which is called at-ta'rif al-istilahi, or where you look at the usul al-fiqh as a full one term. You don't look at it as mudaf ilayh, you look at it one big chunk. So يقال له التعريف اللقبي أو العلمي. It's also sometimes referred to as the name of usul al-fiqh, the term that we would use to refer to usul al-fiqh. So what is it? علم, and remember this, we're going to go into this one. علم بقواعد, knowledge of rules يتوصل بها المجتهد, which a mujtahid may use to do what? إلى استنباط الأحكام, in order to extract rulings من الأدلة التفصيلية, from the explained evidences of Sharia, i.e. Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. So they are ilm usul al-fiqh is knowledge of the rules which a mujtahid uses in order to extract rulings from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. So توضيحه إن الأصول الأدلة التي اتفق عليها جمهور الأمة أربعة. The principles which the mujtahid will use, adilla at-tafsiliyah, in order to extract rulings, will be the Quran, Sunnah, Ijma. Right? And the Qiyas idea will come to later on. وهي المصادر الأصلية لمجتهد الأمة. The mujtahideen of the Aimah. A mujtahid is that person who extracts rulings from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. في استنباط جميع أحكام الشريعة على اختلاف أفهامهم ومناهجهم، ولكن لا يتأتى استنباط الأحكام من هذه الأربعة إلا في ضوء قواعد لغوية وشرعية، فتلك القواعد التي توصل المجتهد إلى استنباط الأحكام من هذه الأربعة هو ما يسمى بأصول الفقه. أصول الفقه is the name of those rules which the mujtahid will use when he is approaching the Quran and Sunnah. Right? Now I'm going to stop there. والقواعد, we're going to come back to this bit right at the end, and we're going to go a little bit into the English part now. So the definition of usul fiqh. So the scholars of usul, as we've discussed, just go through in English, they've provided two famous definitions of usul fiqh. The first definition breaks up the term usul al-fiqh into usul and al-fiqh. The second definition provides a definition that describes the field itself and what it represents. Right, so he looks at the whole chunk usul al-fiqh as one thing. Thus, the first definition, which is the one that divides usul al-fiqh, as we said, the idafi, the mudaf ilayh, it divides usul al-fiqh into two parts. Usul is mudaf and al-fiqh is mudaf ilayh. He says usul, what's usul? Linguistically means ma yubna alayhi ghayruh, i.e. that upon which something else is built, whether literally or metaphorically. In terms of terminology, usul has different connotations, such as dalil, evidence, al-qa'ida al-kulliyah, a general principle, and al-rajih, a preferred opinion. So usul is essentially an evidence or a general principle, a preferred opinion. It is that upon which something else has been built. So the dalail. Accordingly, the first definition would mean that usul al-fiqh is that upon which fiqh is built. This would mean that usul al-fiqh is the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. Because fiqh is based upon the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. So how do you make sense of all of this? Now let's look at this definition of ilm usul al-fiqh. So what I would say is the first definition gives you the definition of usul al-fiqh. And the second definition, when he looks at the whole term, gives you the definition of the field of usul al-fiqh itself. Right? So one is fiqh and one is ilm al-fiqh. One is fiqh, that this is fiqh and this is what fiqh involves, and one is ilm al-fiqh, to study fiqh itself as a field of knowledge, if that makes sense. So one is like, you could say the application side, you could study that this is a lawyer and this is what the lawyer is doing, and one is studying how to become a lawyer, like the field of lawyership. I've just made that word up, right? The field of lawyership. So that would mean you're learning what it means to be a lawyer. Whereas practically, when you become a lawyer and you're applying some of the rules, you are now essentially a lawyer, and the definition of a lawyer would apply to you. What I'm trying to say to you is this second definition is more important, because the second definition of usul fiqh, it describes the field of usul fiqh. What are we doing in this actual field? Don't tell us what usul fiqh is, tell us what the field of usul fiqh is, because we want to know what are we doing inside the field of usul fiqh. Right now, this course is not just on usul fiqh. Because if it was on usul al-fiqh, what I would tell you is usul al-fiqh is the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. Assalamu alaikum, course has ended. Right? That's usul al-fiqh. I've just taught you usul al-fiqh. What is the usul al-fiqh? Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. Khalas, we're done. Let's end the course. So you can see that wouldn't be good enough, right? If you ask me, can you teach us usul al-fiqh? And I said, I'll teach it to you. These are the usul al-fiqh. Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. That's not, you've just taught me what is usul al-fiqh. I'm asking you, can you teach me the field of usul al-fiqh? Oh, okay. Let me now first define to you the field of usul al-fiqh. So this is ilmun biqawa'id, knowledge of certain rules. يتوصل بها المجتهد إلى استنباط الأحكام من الأدلة التفصيلية. That it is the rules which a mujtahid may use in order to extract rulings from the evidential texts, from the evidences, right, that are explained. The Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma'. So there are three concepts here that we need to kind of cover a little bit. Fiqh, what's fiqh? What's usul al-fiqh? And what's the masail al-fiqh, the ahkam? So now let's look at each one, and then we'll come back to the definition of usul fiqh, and we'll try to have a good understanding of what usul fiqh actually does for us. So let's look at fiqh. What is the definition of fiqh? And you'll actually be surprised. I was surprised when I did some research on this about my own understanding of what I thought fiqh was, and what it actually seems to be. So in the Arabic language, the word fiqh actually means al-ilmu bi-shay wal-fahmu lahu, to have knowledge of something and an understanding of it. There's a very famous, this is in Ibn Manzur's Lisanul Arab, right? Lisanul Arab is a massive dictionary in the Arabic language. two very, very famous Arabic dictionaries that you would want to get hold of. They're massive, both of them. And they're probably the two biggest ones, or the two most important ones. I would say that if a student of knowledge has it, he's covered, is Lisanul Arab of Ibn Mandur and Tajul Arus of Az-Zabidi. Right? Tajul Arus is a commentary of Al-Qamus of Al-Firuzabadi. Now, Az-Zabidi, he is a very late scholar, by the way. He's a student of Shah Waliullah, Al-Muhaddith Al-Dahlawi. Az-Zabidi, he quotes Al-Jawhari. Al-Jawhari has got a book called As-Sihah. As-Sihah lil-Jawhari, a very, very, very early book in, you could say, Arabic language, in the sense that a very early dictionary, right? He said, يُقال أُوتِيَ فُلَانٌ فِقْهٌ فِي الدِّينِ أي فَهْمًا فِيهِ. It would be said that so-and-so person has been given the fiqh of religion, i.e. the understanding of it. So fiqh means to understand something. So accordingly, this tells us something. The way, if you look at how they've defined it, fulanun utiya fulanun fiqhun fid din. He has the understanding of religion. This tells you that fiqh does not mean to, fiqh means to not only know something, but to understand it. There's a difference. If I know something, oh, I know this guy, yeah, I know him, that's one thing. To understand a person, that's a different thing, right? Many people, just on a lighter note, you may know your wife, but you may never understand her, right? If that helps to kind of... In fact, some of the Arab Bedouins would use the term in the context of intelligence. So that tells you fiqh is beyond just knowing. So if I know the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma, you're not a faqih yet, right? Because you only know the Quran, you only know the Sunnah. I know Bukhari by heart. I know Sahih Bukhari by heart, for example. Or I know Sahih Muslim by heart. You only know it. That's it. You don't understand it. You don't have the deeper understanding yet. That's the job of the faqih. I.e., a person of fiqh is a person of intelligence and understanding. An example of fiqh being used in this meaning is found in the Quran, wherein the people of Madian said to Shu'aib alayhi salam, they said to him, قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. So they said to Shu'aib alayhi salam that we don't understand a lot of what you are saying. So if you look at this, despite Shu'aib alayhi salam being a part of the community of Madian and them knowing what he is saying, so they knew what he was saying. The word fiqh here means that we know what you're saying, but we don't understand it. It doesn't make sense to us. By the way, Ibn Ashur, who is a very famous, late writer in tafsir, mashallah, he's got a fantastic kitab, Al-Tahrir wa Tanwir. He says that we know from the ahadith when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam describes Shu'aib alayhi salam as one of the most eloquent of the Anbiya. He was the most eloquent, right? He had tremendous abilities in speaking and in Arabic language, but despite that, his community is telling him, we don't understand what you're saying. So was there a problem with his eloquence? No. They knew what he was saying. He was speaking their language, but they just never understood what he was saying. It doesn't make sense to us. We can't understand it. We don't understand the deeper meanings of what you're saying. It doesn't relate to us. So having understood the linguistic definition of fiqh, it is now possible to understand the definition of fiqh in the terminology of Sharia. So when I say terminology, istilah, then I mean, what does this word mean in Sharia? So when I use the term fiqh in the Arabic language, it may not have the same meaning as when I use it in Sharia. What does it mean in Sharia? Fiqh is an understanding of the laws of Sharia. So Abu Yusr al-Bazdawi, rahimahullah, he defines fiqh as وهو العلم بما علق به الأحكام الشرعية المودع في كتاب الله تعالى وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم وإجماع الأمة. That it is the knowledge of that which the rulings of Sharia depend upon, and those rulings are found in the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. ومن وقف على معانيها يسمى فقيها. Whoever is aware of the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma, which he will then use to extract rulings, يسمى فقيها, he is called a faqih. ومن حفظ المسائل, and whoever memorizes masail. So I know, example, salah is fard. Does that make me a faqih? Have I done fiqh there? Am I learning fiqh? No, that's not actually learning fiqh. That's learning the masail of fiqh. There's a difference. ولم يقف على هذه المعاني. The person who learns the rulings and he's not aware of these deeper meanings, يسمى فقيها مجازا. He's only referred to as a faqih metaphorically. لحفظه ما ثبت بالفقه. He has memorized that which fiqh leads you to, which is the ruling of Sharia. الذي علق بها الحكم في النص. That which the ruling has been depending upon in the evidence of Sharia. What we are saying is that the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma, that is fiqh. To understand the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma, that is fiqh. And then to extract the ruling, that is also fiqh. But the ruling that is then finally extracted, that is not fiqh, that is the resultant of fiqh. So if you and I today learn every mas'ala in every book of fiqh, but we've not learned the deeper meanings and the basis and the rationale behind the rulings of Sharia, then you are not a faqih, you are someone who has just memorized that which the fuqaha have given to us. Right? You may be referred to as a faqih metaphorically, but not in a literal sense. So Al-Ghaznawi, he says in his book Al-Hawi Al-Qudsi, by the way, Al-Bazdawi, we'll come to him a bit later, but he's the brother of the very famous Al-Bazdawi. We have two Al-Bazdawi brothers in the Hanafi method, which we'll come to later on. But this is the one who's written a book called Ma'rifatul Hujaj al-Shar'iyyah. Al-Ghaznawi has written a book called Al-Hawi Al-Qudsi. Al-Hawi Al-Qudsi, Ghaznawi, as we know, a student of the author of Bada'i al-Sana'i', which is a very famous Hanafi book. And he was a very famous Hanafi scholar as well, passed away in 593. He says, معنى الفقه في اللغة الوقوف والاطلاع وفي الشريعة الوقوف الخاص. He says that the meaning of fiqh in linguistics is to be aware and to have deep understanding. But in Sharia, it's a specific form of deep understanding, which is al-wuquf ala ma'ani an-nusus, to be aware of the deeper meanings of the text of Sharia, Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. وإشاراتها, and the indications, ودلالاتها, and the inferences, ومضمراتها, and the hidden gems, you could say, ومقتضياتها, and the demands. So Al-Bazdawi and Al-Ghaznawi's definition, both of theirs, so the first one and the second one, it indicates towards what? That fiqh is the process by which a Shari'i ruling is determined. So considering the above, we may now understand the difference between fiqh and between the Quran and Sunnah. The Quran and the Sunnah are the sources of law. Fiqh is the process of looking at the deeper meanings of the Quran and Sunnah in order to determine the Sharia law. So what did Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to do? What did Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam come to do? What was the purpose of the existence of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It was to bring hidayah into the world, 100%. But one of the key aspects, if not the key aspect of Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam's life, was to establish Sharia law, to establish the law of Allah, right? So he did that by giving us the sources of the law, which is the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. He did not automatically, you could say, he did not give us Sharia law in the sense that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is only going to be living for a limited period of time. إِنَّكَ مَيِّتٌ وَإِنَّهُمْ مَيِّتُونَ. What he did essentially was give us the sources of the law. We can use his ahadith to extract more rulings, and we can understand the deeper meanings behind the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma in order to come up with a concrete Sharia law on a certain topic related to human life. So Sharia law is something different, and the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma are essentially the sources upon which the Sharia law is based upon. So this is an important distinction. Why? It shows that if you've acquired or memorized the Quran, you don't yet know Sharia law. Like that doesn't mean you are now fully aware of Sharia law. Sunnah, and this is the more applicable one. Sometimes a person will say, well, I've read Bukhari and Muslim, right? So I know Sharia law. Don't tell me about Sharia law. I've read Bukhari and Muslim. I've read all the books of hadith out there. No, the Sunnah as well is not the same as fiqh. Fiqh is to understand the contents of both of these two sources and ijma and all of their deeper meanings and their rationale and the philosophy and the deeper ways of thinking about all of them. A holistic view of the Quran and Sunnah in order to deduce the Sharia law. That process is fiqh. So fiqh is an action. Fiqh is an action. It takes you to Sharia law. It's the bit in between Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma and the Masail. That process that got you there to the Masail, from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma to the Masail, that was fiqh. So fiqh is an action. It's something you do. It's something you kind of do to the Quran and Sunnah and Ijma, and then you come up with the Sharia law at the end of it. So what this means is that it's possible for a person to know all the Quranic verses and all the ahadith, which is obviously a source for the sunnah, essentially the sunnah you could say, and yet still he may not be a faqih. Why? Because he does not have a deep understanding of the meanings and objectives of the Quran and the sunnah. On the other hand, it's not possible for a person to be a faqih without first knowing all the Quran sunnah, all the Quranic verses and the sunnah. This is why, because considering the fact that fiqh is an understanding of the laws of Sharia, the sources of which are the Quran and Sunnah, and it is not possible to understand something without first having knowledge of it, it therefore means that a faqih must have first knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah and then a deep understanding of these two sources. How can you understand something if you don't know it? How can you understand someone if you don't know them? You can never do that. But you can know someone but not fully understand them. So it is possible for you to know the Quran. It is possible for you to know all the hadith, but you don't have a good understanding of them. And that is why we go back to the fuqaha. That is why we go back to these madhabs. And that is why we stress the importance of fiqh and going back to a person who has a good understanding of the Quran. So this is something that we have a very misunderstanding with sometimes, which is that we conflate the two. We assume that because a person is such a big muhaddith, that means I can take all my fiqh from him. But the fiqh is not always the same as just knowing all ahadith. When we will study this a bit further, you will see fiqh actually is there's a lot of rationality involved. There's a lot of looking at the objectives of Sharia as well, objectives of this hadith, and looking at holistic understanding of looking at all the Quranic ayat on this topic, all the hadith on the topic, then looking at what's the Sharia trying to achieve. All of that process is fiqh. Then finally giving the ruling. This is wajib. That ruling is the Sharia law. That is not fiqh. Like that is the end result of fiqh. That is what came out of the fiqh machine was the final ruling, which is, something is fard. So if I can again use the idea of a machine has just come to my mind, but it's a good one. If I put Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma into the fiqh machine, the fiqh essentially, you could say, gives me a deep understanding of all of these sources, and it finally gives me a ruling for every mas'ala, or every situation in human life. And knowing those rulings is not fiqh. Fiqh was that machine that did that. And for us, our machines were not machines. They were great scholars of the past, the likes of Abu Hanifa, Malik, al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, and Imam Ahmad. Those were our machines, you could say, or the ones who did the work for us of deriving this law from the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. So that derivation, that was the original fiqh. So Dr. Hamza Bakri also shows how the understanding of a hadith that is required in fiqh is far more deep than the understanding of a hadith that is needed by a muhaddith. So he says that the amount that a muhaddith needs to understand of a hadith is not as much as what a faqih needs to understand. The faqih needs to go way beyond the text. He goes like proper into the nitty-gritty, and you will see that because from now I can just give you a spoiler alert, which is Uṣūl al-Fiqh teaches you how to do fiqh, right? So Uṣūl al-Fiqh is essentially, if we go back to our analogy of the machine, Uṣūl al-Fiqh teaches you a little bit about how this machine works. We're studying how the machine was working. We're trying to understand how Abu Hanifa, Malik, al-Shafi'i, Imam Ahmad, obviously for the contents of our course is the Ḥanafī madhab. So we'll be trying to think about how Abu Hanifa's machine was working. How did, what's the inner workings of how this machine works, right? So that's what we're doing in Uṣūl al-Fiqh. But nonetheless, what we're trying to say is that you will see in Uṣūl al-Fiqh that the level that a faqih has to look at for a text of hadith, he goes way beyond the apparent. He has to go right into the nitty-gritty. What could be the inference? What could be, okay, this word has this is a general term. It could include this term, it could include these people, it might not include them. Okay, how has it been established? Let's look at, has it come through authentic chain of narration? Has it come through mutawatir, indisputable chain of narration? What type of knowledge is this giving us? Is it indicating towards something? Is it definitively telling us something? So they look so much beyond what a muhaddith would look at. The muhaddith is more concerned with, did this event occur or not? Has this hadith happened or not? Right? Looking at the deeper meanings of the actual text was left to the faqih. So he says, وَالتَّحْقِيقُ أَنَّ التَّفَقُّهَ فِي مُتُونِ الْأَحَادِيثِ قَدْ يُطْلَقُ بِمَعْنَى الْغَوْصِ فِي مَعَانِيهَا. That tafaqquh, understanding the text of a hadith, is at times used in the meaning of diving into its meanings, وَاسْتِنْبَاطِ الْأَحْكَامِ مِنْهَا, and extracting rulings from it, وَمَعْرِفَةُ وُجُوهِ دَلَالَتِهَا, and to understand the different inferences and the ways in which there are indications being made, مِنْ عُمُومٍ وَخُصُوصٍ وَإِطْلَاقٍ وَتَقْيِيدٍ وَغَيْرِهَا. And is it khas? Is it am? Is it mutlaq? Is it general? Is it specified? Is it what's the inferences that we're understanding from this hadith? All of that. وهو بهذا المعنى, he says, ليس بداخل ليس داخلا في علم الحديث البتة وليس من شأن المحدث الدخول فيه وإنما ينفرد به علم الفقه. That it is not the responsibility of a muhaddith to engage in these deeper meanings of the hadith. He just must understand the hadith. So essentially, when you have a person who comes to you and says, well, I've read Bukhari and Muslim, I've read all the books of hadith, and I think that this madhab is totally wrong. I think they've totally got it wrong. The hadith is clear. What we would say to that person is, these madhahib are essentially they are essentially an understanding of these ahadith that you are pointing towards. What you are saying that these madhahib are contradicting is not actual real contradiction of those ahadith. It is a contradiction of your understanding of these ahadith, right? So it's literally your understanding up against the understanding of literally an institute of scholars of generations, millennial generations, right? You could say thousands of generations have gone by, millions of scholars, you could argue, who engaged in this tradition of the Hanafi madhab, Shafi madhab, Hanbali madhab, whatever. It's their understanding up against your one-handed understanding of these ahadith, right? So his misunderstanding of this person who argues this idea that your madhab is contradicting the hadith is, he feels that everything is black and white. He feels that this hadith is black and white. What he does not seem to have a good appreciation of, should I say, is it's not that we are contradicting the hadith, we are contradicting your understanding of this hadith. And you need to make sure that you don't have a monopoly on the Quran and Sunnah. Nobody has a monopoly on the Quran and Sunnah. That it's the way I've understood the Quran and Sunnah is exactly what the Quran and Sunnah is saying. And there's no doubt about it. Right? If you start, and that's what happens when you view things in a ultra literalist way. We don't also want to become like a wishy-washy, like nothing's black and white. We don't even know it, literally, like it's the Quran is like you can make any meaning. We don't want to go down that path. It's in between. There's a balance, right? There's some things that are clear, black and white. There are other things where in the madhahib are able to kind of have a different understanding, and Sharia allowed that everyone has a certain understanding. As long as it's backed up with decent evidence, you appreciate it. Now, for someone to come and just say, this is the correct understanding and everybody else got it wrong, and you are all contradicting the hadith, not realizing that they're not contradicting the hadith, they're just contradicting your fiqh. They're contradicting your deeper understanding, right, of these hadith. So it's quite important to distinguish between the two. And we're going to come to that a bit more in detail. So, وقد يطلق التفقه في متون الأحاديث بمعنى فهم معانيها. As for having the basic understanding of what this hadith is saying, what is this hadith saying? إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Indeed, actions are according to intentions. That's the basic understanding. Actions are determined by your intention. That's, I don't know, every muhaddith would know that much, and maybe a bit further than that they would know as well. But as for what's the deeper inferences, does this mean that you need a niyyah inside wudu? Isn't wudu an amal? So all of the deeper meanings and looking at the linguistic relevance and all of that is the job of the faqih. He looks at the deeper meanings. So therefore, a mujtahid is actually the highest form of a faqih. So the pinnacle of fiqh is to do ijtihad, and to become a faqih is to, in some ways, you're on the journey of becoming a mujtahid. So in this day and age, we could say, when we look at someone like Mufti Taqi Uthman, you would say he's got tremendous abilities in fiqh. He's such a faqih. In some ways, you could say he's got some abilities of ijtihad, in the sense that he's developed some abilities, and he's not. I'm not saying he's a mujtahid, by the way, before someone attacks me or says you're calling for whatever. I'm not calling for that at all. But he has some abilities in ijtihad, without a shadow of a doubt. He has some capabilities. So in fact, an argument could be made that a faqih can only be a mujtahid. The true faqih is only a mujtahid, because only he has a true understanding. Remember, what is fiqh? Understanding. Only he has a true understanding of the Quran and Sunnah, and he has properly understood them. And Uṣūl al-Fiqh is an ability to try to get into his mind and to try to do what he did, and to try to carry out what he did and develop it further. So essentially, the machine that understands the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma', that is fiqh. and to try to understand this machine is usul al-fiqh. So وَقَوْلُنَا يُتَوَصَّلُ بِهَا إِلَيْهِ al-Mahbubi, who writes a book called At-Tawdih in Uṣūl al-Fiqh, a famous Hanafi book, which we'll come to in the next lesson or next few lessons. الظاهر أن هذا يختص بالمجتهد. He says fiqh is specific to the mujtahid. فإن المبحوث عنه في هذا العلم قواعد يتوصل المجتهد بها إلى الفقه. فإن المتوصل إلى الفقه ليس إلا المجتهد. The person who reaches fiqh is none but a mujtahid. Only a mujtahid is carrying out true fiqh. So, today a person might say to you, well, no, I know Quduri. You will tell him, you know the masail of fiqh. You are not yet a faqih. He might, but in this day and age, like I said, as Ghaznawi and Bazdawi mentioned, majazan, metaphorically at times, in this day and age, we refer to someone who knows all the masail of fiqh, we say he's also a faqih. But not really. He's not a real faqih. He's just a faqih in terms of metaphorically. Not in reality, he is not. فإن الفقه والعلم بالأحكام من الأدلة التي ليس دليل المقلد منها. فلهذا لم تذكر, and he discusses here that why in usul fiqh do we not discuss the conditions of taqleed, etc. Because a muqallid is actually never able to do any fiqh, right? In the sense that his muqallid is essentially following the real faqih, which is his imam. But with that being said, I'm not saying the muqallid is not able to do any fiqh. That's not entirely true as well. There is scope for us to do fiqh within the paradigm of a madhab. And mashallah, people like Mufti Taqi Uthmani, they lead the way, Mufti Ridha al-Haq, and others. They apply true fiqh when a new mas'ala turns up. For example, in this day and age, I mean, I might, this might sound a bit controversial, but I'll just say the issue of, it's a very, scary mas'ala, but it's a mas'ala that we're faced with, which will show you now the clear how scholars are applying some level of fiqh, which will be stuff like transgender and stuff, right? Where they will be using now, they're trying to be getting into that, they will be using usul al-fiqh, trying to get into the mind of how Abu Hanifa would approach the Quran and Sunnah, and trying to see, can we do the same fiqh that Abu Hanifa did to try to come up with a solution for this mas'ala. So Ibn Amir al-Hajj al-Halabi in his At-Taqrir wa Tahbir, he kind of says the same thing, which is that he says that fiqh is limited to the mujtahid, essentially, that the true faqih is the مجتهد. So his غايته أن هذا لا يتأتى إلا للمجتهد لأن تحصيل تلك القاعدة الكلية ثم تركيبها مع غيرها على الوجه المنتج للمطلوب يتوقف على البحث عن أحوال الأدلة والأحكام ومعرفة الشرائط والقيود المعتبرة في كلية القاعدة، وبالجملة يتوقف كذلك على قيام ملكة الاستنباط بالمحصل، وهي لا تكون إلا لمن هو في رتبة الاجتهاد. Right? You have to be a mujtahid. Mujtahid means the highest level of faqih. The most intelligent scholars of Islam were the ones who were able to extract these deeper rulings of Sharia using their deeper understanding, deeper fiqh of Sharia, of the sources of Sharia, Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma. And therefore, we can now conclude that the true appliers of Uṣūl al-Fiqh is the process by which you learn these deeper meanings. How can we now learn the deeper meanings of the Quran, Sunnah, and Ijma? How can we do fiqh? How do we do fiqh? By learning Uṣūl al-Fiqh. If we learn ilmu Uṣūl al-Fiqh, we can learn fiqh. So considering that the two true people who did fiqh were the mujtahideen, that tells us the only two true people who can apply Uṣūl al-Fiqh properly is the mujtahidun. And when we are learning ilmu Uṣūl al-Fiqh, we are essentially attempting to learn how these great mujtahid were trying to think. We are trying to learn how they were doing their fiqh. How did they come up with these deeper understandings? So it comes from an area of respect, not an area of judgment. And this is very important because sometimes we study Uṣūl al-Fiqh like, our Uṣūl clearly says this, our Imam's gone against it. Whereas you're not understood. Uṣūl al-Fiqh is a back projection. We are trying to understand the mind of the mujtahid, not that we judge the mujtahid using our usul, if that makes sense. So Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi mentioned something. وَلْيَعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْإِكْثَارَ مِنْ كَتْبِ الْحَدِيثِ وَرِوَايَتِهِ لَا يَجْعَلُ بِهَا الرَّجُلُ فَقِيهًا. He says you can write as many ahadith as you want, you can narrate as many ahadith as you want, you can become the Shaykh al-Hadith of your time, which means you know every hadith, or you narrate Bukhari and Muslim, and you could become the most notable muhaddith of your time in the sense that Kutub al-Sitta is at the tip of your tongue. To this day, mashallah, I see some people, it's good, you know, You can quote a hadith from the tip of their tongue. That's fine. That's brilliant. And people will say as well, okay, he's got brilliant istihdar. He's got brilliant memory. That's fantastic. Memory does not make you a faqih, right? Understanding of the Quran and Sunnah and ijma, that makes you a faqih. So you may not know every hadith out there, but when someone tells you about all the hadith on the topic, the understanding that you have is the best understanding. No one ever thought of that. And it's actually in line with the full understanding of Sharia. So he says that know that narrating and writing lots of hadith does not make a person a faqih. إِنَّمَا يَتَفَقَّهُ بِإِسْتِنْبَاطِ مَعَانِيهِ وَإِنْعَامِ التَّفَكُّرِ فِيهِ. Indeed, a person learns fiqh, or he becomes a faqih, by extracting its deeper meanings and applying deep thought to the Quran and Sunnah. Thus, every faqih has knowledge and understanding of the Quran and Sunnah, but not everyone who has knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah will necessarily be a faqih, due to an absence of correct understanding. And Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam actually indicates towards this. He says, نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ إِمْرَأً سَمِعَ مِنَّا شَيْئًا فَبَلَّغَهُ كَمَا سَمِعَ. That may Allah, look after and keep fresh the person who hears a hadith from me and he passes it on to the next person. Why should he pass it on? فَرُبَّ مُبَلَّغٍ. For at times, the person to whom a hadith is passed on to is more aware of the hadith and he has a better understanding of the hadith than the person who actually heard it. So this happens sometimes, it happens as a teacher, right? If you're teaching a class, sometimes you've known this kitab your whole life, you've read this ibara your whole life, and then you mention it to your students, and then the student actually says to you, yeah, and what's up, you could using this same ibara that you just mentioned, you could also say this as well. And you're like, wow, yeah, I never thought of that. That's brilliant. So that's what Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam is trying to say here, that at times you can be the biggest muhaddith, but someone else will have a better understanding of the ahadith that you've acquired. And that's important to understand, that in this day and age sometimes as well, so commonly I see students, this person is a master in hadith, he's a master in hadith. But the truth is, the solution to Sharia and the thing that Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam came to establish, in many ways you could say, was fiqh. In many ways he came to establish Sharia law. And these madahib are representations of that Sharia law that he came to establish. So the latter part of this hadith indicates that it's possible for an individual to be aware of a hadith, but not understand the deeper meaning and objective behind the hadith, i.e. the fiqh behind the hadith. So you can have the hadith, but you don't have the fiqh behind the hadith. So a famous incident indicates how knowing about a hadith or Quranic verse is not the same as having a deep understanding of it. Ibn Abdul Barr, for example, records from Abu Yusuf rahimahullah that he said, سألني الأعمش. So Abu Yusuf says, Al-A'mash asked me about a mas'ala. وأنا وهو لا غير. I was with him and there was no one else with us. فقال لي, so he said to me, من أين قلت هذا يعقوب? Where did you get this from, Yaqub? How did you understand this mas'ala? Excuse me. How did you answer this question? I didn't know the answer to this mas'ala. I've never heard this solution been given before. But I've always wondered about it, and you came up with the best ruling and solution. So Abu Yusuf says, I understood the ruling for this mas'ala due to a hadith that you narrated to me. So then Abu Yusuf says, I actually recorded to him the hadith that you told me. He tells A'mash, Abu Yusuf tells A'mash, that do you know this ruling that I've given that you're so impressed with? You're the one who told me the hadith which I used to extract this ruling. So he says, Ya Yaqub. He says, Subhanallah, Yaqub, which is the name of Abu Yusuf. Inni la ahfadhu hadha al-hadith. Indeed, I have memorized this hadith min qabli an yajtami'a abawak. Before your mom and dad even met, i.e. before you were even born, I had heard of this hadith. But ma araftu ta'wilahu illa al-an. I had never understood that this is one way of thinking about this hadith and this is one ruling that you can extract from the hadith, except to this day. Right? Ibn Hajar, in his Fath al-Bari, which is a sharh of Sahih al-Bukhari, he mentions that, you know that hadith, Ya Umair ma fa'ala an-Nughayr. Some scholars extracted over 100 fawaid and fiqhi rulings from that hadith. It wasn't just fiqhi, it was adabi rulings as well. But I'm just showing to you that the understanding of a certain hadith is so much more than just the hadith. It's not the same. Knowing the hadith and understanding the hadith is two different things, right? In the hadith of Al-Bara ibn Azib, there's a scholar of the past, Ibn Daqiq al-Eid, in his Sharh al-Ilmam, when he comes to it, he extracts 400 fiqhi masail from this one hadith, right? That tells you the fiqh of the man. Then Ar-Rama Hurmuzi, he narrates another incident and he records another incident, but I'm looking at the time and we're at 6:15, and I do want to kind of stick to the times because I know people, the time is a trust. As much as possible, I will try. I can't guarantee every week that it will be perfectly on 6:15, but I will try, inshallah ta'ala, every day, every week, to try to keep it to 6:15. Also, if at the end of if you think, by the way, that we're going too slow, don't worry. We do this in previous courses as well. We usually add on a few lessons. So although I said 10, it may end up being about 13, 14. Allah knows best. But we'll stop there, and I'll mention to you a few more stories of this idea of separating between being a muhaddith, where you kind of know about the hadith, and being a faqih, where you have the deeper understanding behind the hadith. And if there's any questions, we can open up to some questions, inshallah ta'ala. Is it possible to zoom into the text? The PDF is actually on the group, so feel free, inshallah, to have a look at that if you need to. But let me know if there's anything I can help you with right now. I'd be happy to. If there's any questions, feel free to write in the Q&A or in the chat, whichever one you prefer. So inshallah, we will be, Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Do you have any advice for us moving forward, especially the beginnings? The beginners, this is the course for you. So honestly, you don't need to do anything, I would say. On the group, I might mention a few books that you need to read, but seriously, it's just if you can attend the lesson, or even if you attend the recording, just access the recordings as much as possible as you can, stay up to date if you can. Otherwise, just, if you fall behind, just catch up and just make your notes. That's really good. Did you get to help us do ihtisab for this class? Why we should study this, etc.? I did join a little late. I will listen again, inshallah. Why we should study this, etc.? I think we did. Yeah, I would say so. You can you can maybe check the recording later if you think I did it well enough. But I think we are still studying that idea. We're studying the concept of why we study Uṣūl al-Fiqh and what is Uṣūl al-Fiqh. So right now, what we were studying is essentially what is fiqh, in order to come back to our question. Remember, our original question is still the same, and we're going to come back to that, which is what is Uṣūl al-Fiqh, and we're still going to come back to that. Right now, we're just taking a slight detour because in order to understand what is Uṣūl al-Fiqh, we need to understand what is fiqh. With a topic like this, is there a technique to the note taking? If you want, some people, what they usually do is they print out the actual slides and then they make some notes on the side. So they print it out in a way in which they minimize it and then they make some notes. That could help. Otherwise, simple notebook. Honestly, you've seen my notes, with my terrible handwriting. It can be as simple as that. I've put some notes, I think, on the group. I usually write my notes at the start of my books, with probably the smallest handwriting possible. But you do whatever's best for you. I know, so I like the iPad as well. Sometimes the iPad, there's an app on it. It's brilliant. I use it sometimes. Mind maps. It helps you to draw mind maps and stuff. That's good as well if you're into that. I really can't dictate to you how to make your notes because it's just each person is different, inshallah. Okay, inshallah, it seems like there's no further questions. Without wasting too much time, I think you've got my number. I'm on the group. If you have any questions, you can either write it on the group, or you can just private message me, whichever one you prefer. If you don't, like someone's just mentioned, please add me to the group. Okay, private message me. I'm not sure. You should be on the group if you're on the course, unless I forgot to send you the. I really do apologize if that's happened, right? Sincerest apologies, and I'll add you on very straight away after this class. Jazakumullahu khairah. Okay, we'll stop there, inshallah. Next Tuesday we'll continue, same time. Jazakumullahu khairah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.